Hello and welcome to the Detective Case.
A Detective Close podcast.
We're your hosts. I'm here, Shirley.
And I'm Brian Townsend.
Today we have a special guest. I'm going to let Brian go ahead and introduce him.
Yeah, I'm excited to have Richard Sanchez with us. I have the opportunity to work with Mr. Sanchez while at the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. And without further ado, welcome.
No, it's my pleasure to be here, guys, and I appreciate the time and, more importantly, your service and continued dedication to the law enforcement community. It's important that we still get the word out there and be a part of it. And thank you for having me on the show today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Looking forward to learning more, sharing more about you and what you're doing and where you've been and where you're going now. So let's
Yes,
talk.
sir.
We're going to kind of start with your origin story. Where did your law enforcement career start? How did that all kind of happen?
Well, that is a long, convoluted story. So I'll start off. Typically, what I like to tell people is I'm a son of a heroin addicted dad and a prostitute mom. My parents met in a rehabilitation center in San Antonio, Texas. I was born in October of 1974, and then after their relationship, um, and I was born, they moved to a little town called Floresville, Texas. It's a little suburb outside of San Antonio. At the time, probably had about 2,500 people. And my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, offered my parents a place to stay after I was born. And shortly thereafter, my father, in his criminal element mind, decided to rob a bank and was sent to Texarkana Penitentiary in Texarkana, Texas, where my mom then back to San Antonio, where we bounced around for a number of years until my little brother was born. And then because of my mom's, in and out of trouble, we were taken away from her and placed in state care and custody. Uh, by that time, I was about 6 years old, and my paternal grandparents came and got my brother and I. Of course, we had different dads, but my grandmother did not want us to be separated, so they took us both in, and we moved back to their house in Floresville, Texas. It was a very tumultuous family. My grandparents had 6 children, my father being the eldest, followed by two of his brothers who were also in and out of prison and heroin junkies themselves. Um, so I grew up in that environment and I was surrounded by it, and it became our way of life for a long, long time.
So what was your view on like law enforcement then at this point?
Well, so there was a couple of things that happened. So the first time I met my dad, he came out of prison when I was in junior high, and it wasn't long before he started taking me with him on his deliveries, and I learned how to balloon heroin. I learned how to count money. I learned how to cut it, and I held it in my mouth as instructed by him. And if we got stopped, he wanted me to swallow it. So that was my indoctrination into the drug world, and that went on for a period of time until ultimately he was arrested. Uh, However, to answer your original question, our next door neighbor in this small town was like a second grandmother to me, who had a child, that was my father's age, and that him and my father were good friends. One night, I was called over to their house because my father's buddy and his son were getting into a fight, and the son wanted me to watch him beat up his dad. So I was there, and the way small towns operate, at least here in Texas, is a state trooper showed up, and that trooper happened to be the nephew to my next door neighbor. And I had seen him periodically throughout the years because he would come visit his aunt. And he pulled me aside and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, Albert, the son, wanted me to come watch him beat up his dad, so here I am." And the trooper was Ray Bettis, and he says, "Well, I'm getting ready to promote, and I'm being sent to Harlingen, Texas, which is in South Texas." He said, "Why don't you come stay with me for spring break? You can ride with troopers at night, and during the day, you can watch my 2 girls. At the time, they were little bitty girls. So that was kind of my insight into the law enforcement arena and what it was like to be around a stable family and what a true family looked like because my dynamics at home were very, very different. My grandfather was extremely abusive, both mentally and physically. Again, I was surrounded by, the criminal elements. Uh, and this was like the first time I've got to be in a stable environment where you're not living in chaos.
That's wild. In a short amount of time, you got to see two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it wasn't a short period of time, but the period I stayed with him, and then as our relationship formulated, I would get to go down, spend a week or two with him during the summers, and continue to ride with troopers. And it was by that time I was already a junior or sophomore in high school. So I said, "Hey, I need to get my life together." My father had been arrested numerous times since then, so our relationship became strained. Very different from the first time that he had gotten out and I had met him. I mean, there was nothing more than I wanted to do than be with my dad. My mom's contact was very sporadic. We grew up very, very poor, and whatever items that we did have, my heroin addicted uncles would take it for themselves to, use it to get money to score. And whatever money my grandmother had, she would give to them so they wouldn't get in trouble and end up back in jail. So it was a roller coaster ride of a childhood.
Yes.
But once I got into high school, I figured, okay, well, this is time for me to try to do something different. Um, and during my childhood with my grandfather, it was routine to be told you're never going to be worth anything, you're never going to amount to anything. Your life is destined to be like your father, and it was just that type of environment. Um, and being in a small town, you weren't expected to thrive anyway because the relationships and reputations of your family, were evident. So the only people you ever hung out with were people that came from the same type of environment that you did. So you're labeled in the community and you're labeled in school. And it caused me to have relationships that were just not fruitful. I fought a lot. I was suspended a lot from school, uh, routinely in trouble. So being around Ray and his family gave me a different insight and different opportunities. So based on some mentoring and guidance, my grades were horrible. I decided I would try to get into the military. So I went and took the ASFAB a couple of times, and the recruiters wouldn't accept my scores because they were too low, and they said the jobs that I would qualify for would not be, anything that they would recommend that I do. So I decided to try to go to college and ended up at Sam Houston State for a period of time in Huntsville. How they accepted me, I have no idea. It was definitely divine intervention and God's will. Um, until I met the requirements. My whole goal at that point was to obtain the necessary 60 hours to apply to be a state trooper in Texas. Um, and the first time I did that, I was 20 and a half years old, not even 21 yet. I applied and I thought I was a shoe-in because, I had ridden with all these troopers. They all knew me. Um, I had good rapport with them. I had distanced myself from my family, so there was no crossing of those lines. And then I didn't get in, and it was very disheartening. It was a very humbling experience, and you couldn't help but think back to the words that my grandfather used to shout at me of, "You're not worth a shit, and you're never going to be shit." They continue to resonate with me, but all that really did was add a lot of fire, fuel to my fire, and it created um, a mentality in me that I was able to compartmentalize and harbor that anger, frustration, and disappointment, all the while using it to fuel me to continue to go forward. Uh, a year later, after not being accepted, I continued going to school. By this time, I'm at the University of Texas in San Antonio, um, and I applied again. I'm 21 and a half this time, and I get denied once again. So this is the second time, and by this time, I'm really thinking, man, my grandfather was spot on. I'm not worth a shit, and I'm never gonna be shit. I didn't know what to do. Depression started to kick in, and you start to wonder, okay, where's my life going? I'm 21 years old, So what I ended up doing is re-registering to school again. Um, and lo and behold, I got a call. They accepted me into the academy. But as I was going through the process, there was a very enlightening thing that happened, and that was the first time I met with the DPS recruiter. And he's sitting there going through a stack of papers. And at the time, I didn't know what they were. And he goes, Richard, I don't know that we're going to be able to accept you. And I said, well, how come? And he's like, your dad is a bank robber. He's a drug distributor. He's gotten several arrests for aggravated assault, deadly weapon. And Richard, your mom's a prostitute. She's been arrested several times for prostitution. I just don't see us getting you through the process. And my heart sunk. The fight or flight response kicked in, and what do? And he said, give me one good reason why I should send this application forward. And as I'm sitting there with my palms sweating and, my heart racing and, anger, and should I just walk out and hold my head in my hands? My response was very simple. I said, don't judge me by the blood of my family, but if you're going to judge me by what I've done by myself, and look at the small things in the small amount of time I've been able to accomplish. And he sent it forward. And that was my acceptance into the DPS Academy.
Full circle there. Yeah. So you're 22 and a half, 22, 23 years old, and
21 and a half.
Okay. And you start your career, your law enforcement career. And
yes, sir.
How long do you stay with DPS?
So the academy was 26 and a half weeks. Out of 100 people, you lose 20 automatically just because they don't get through. And I was sent to a small town in between McAllen and Corpus Christi called Falfurrias, Texas. And that is where Highway US 281 runs through, a major thoroughfare, corridor for drug traffickers. So I got really good at highway interdiction. All my time there was nothing to do in the town outside of work. You live in a glass house per se because, it is a very, very small town. When I say small, it's probably 1,500 people at the most there. So I spent all my time either at the U.S. checkpoint, learning how to do interdiction and what to look for from Border Patrol agents, and then I would apply it on the highway. And I was so fortunate and blessed that probably 1 out of 10 or 15 cars that I would stop had a load of either contraband money or some warrant arrest. So based on that, I was selected to be what was called the CLE trooper, criminal law enforcement trooper. And there was only 16 of them in the state. So my selection was sent to San Antonio where I was able to come back. And based on that, I got to know a lot of DEA agents because all my cases were going federal. I could file direct with the prosecutor's office. And, at the time, Javier Peña was the ASAC here in San Antonio, and several of the agents, would invite me out for drinks afterwards. I was single, so I got to know all these guys, and lo and behold, the invitation and recruitment started. And so I did 7 years with DPS.
How was it being on that side of the law? I mean, not that you were a criminal, but now you're, seeking and building cases against people, that are involved with drugs, and that's the environment that you grew up in somewhat, but with your family. How was that transition from you, like just mentally? Like, how did that?
Well, that was what drove me. That was what, I didn't never wanted a child to have to grow up like I did. That was my whole premise to wanting to do what I did, is if I could at least save one child's life to keep from them to having to suffer and endure what I endured as a child, what my family endured, then that was my sole purpose and mission to do. So every time I stopped a car that had dope in it, I had empathy for them, but I also knew that what they were doing was wrong. So I was able to get a lot of people to cooperate. And as a result of that, we did controlled deliveries all over the country. And it worked out to my benefit having that history being able to really, talk to people, hey, I know where you're coming from, I understand, you made a bad choice, et cetera, et cetera. And it played to my benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very familiar with the Falfurrias area, as you know.
Yes, sir.
A lot of drugs coming up 281 for sure, and sounds like you were pretty busy. So you did that for 6, 7 years, and then
7 years, yes, sir.
with your relationships you were making with DEA, you took that leap.
I did, but it was not an easy leap. Once again, I had to answer for the sins of my family. Pamela Arsamont was a recruiter at the time in Houston, Texas, and when I applied, I had to go back and finish my degree because I didn't have my degree at the time. So it took a lot of commitment because I've always been a guy that wants to work. I mean, I applaud the education and getting continuing it. But for me, I just enjoyed being in the grind of things. Um, so making the time to want to go to school was very challenging. Plus, I'm just not very studious. I didn't grow up with the ability to know how to study. I was written off in schools. So for me, I really had to narrow down my focus and just drive hard at studying, which is extremely challenging. So, and plus my mind just doesn't work that way. I have to be stimulated, or at that time, I just needed constant stimulation, right? I didn't want to be alone. I was running from the ghost. You know, I was chasing the same high that my parents were, but just in a different form, if that makes sense. Arresting criminals and finding dope in cars, doing undercover work, that was my high. And I enjoyed the accolades. I enjoyed the pat on the backs that came with that. um, and that later on, as you'll see, it came back to bite me. But um, sitting with Pam, she said, "Richard, I don't think we're going to be able to hire you. Your family's history is just too bad." And then once again, I gave her the same speech as I did the recruiter from DPS, 7 years prior. And I said, listen, look at the accolades that I've gotten from DPS. Look at all the things I've been able to accomplish. Look at the people that are writing letters for me. Don't judge me based on my family's blood, but if you give me a chance, you won't be disappointed. And she was able to push it through and went to the academy in 2003 and was sent to Laredo, Texas.
I think it speaks to your character, the fight within you. You, like you said, you didn't want to see any other child go through what you went through, and all these obstacles in your way, you're constantly just pushing through. And I think that, again, to say it again, speaks to your character. You knew that you needed the education, not because you just wanted to add to your plate, but it was a means to an end, right? You knew that you needed that to accomplish your next goal of working with the DEA. So your application goes through. Um, you're working with DPS, and you get the call, and you finally go to Quantico and come out to Laredo. So you keep on coming back to Texas. Was that by design?
Well, see, I was actually being sent to Miami. Um, and when I got back to San Antonio, Javier Pena called me in his office and he goes, "Why are you not coming back to Texas?" And I said, "Well, sir, there was no openings." He said, "Would you be willing to go to Eagle Pass or Laredo?" And I said, 100%. Um, he says, "Okay, well, then let's get you to Laredo." So that transition happened when I was at home for my 90 days, and waiting to go to Miami. So yeah, Texas is home. It's where I feel most comfortable. It's where my contacts are. It's where my reputation has been established. At that time, that meant a lot. You go off a reputation, your work ethic. People knew that they could count on me, and I was reliable, and that meant a lot to me to do that. And more importantly, it meant a lot because um, I knew I was changing the trajectory of my family's history, and that again was very important to me.
Yeah.
Breaking the curse per se, if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah. It's interesting for non-DEA folks. The the Texas connection is amazing. It's very common to find DEA folks who've worked in multiple offices, and Texas and are always looking for a way to get back. It's just
Yes,
that
sir.
state that just pulls people. I guess that's a whole another discussion, but
Yeah.
it's tried, right? So you're in Laredo, and walk us through that.
So I'm in Laredo, and I'm down there with some really great guys. But our bread and butter was the task force officers that took me under their wing, and established my DEA foundation and career that catapulted me um, to where I ended up. You know, Laredo was very unique in the sense of supervisors because you didn't need a very high score to get selected for Laredo. So therefore, that resulted in not getting, the best supervisors that, could really mentor, lead, and guide, and do casework. So that was challenging, however, we worked through it, and the camaraderie of the office, the cases that we were able to put together, um, was phenomenal. Um, and again, it's one of those things where I think back and I go, man, how honored and privileged I was to be in Laredo, Texas.
Yeah. So how long were you? Did you transfer there into supervision? Did you test, or did you?
No, so where I was in Laredo 4 years, and then I did a voluntary to San Antonio. Tom Hinojosa was the ASAC in Laredo, and then he transferred to San Antonio, and he brought me to San Antonio with him. And then I did 2 years here, and uh, ended up in Cartagena, Colombia. So I was down there during the height of the semi-submersibles and submersible phase, and I worked again with some great individuals that really took me under their wing. Tony Hubbard, who has been a dear friend, a brother, and a mentor to me. Um, he's been there through my toughest and best times. So we did some really good stuff together. Um, Misha Piastra was our GS, and again, thought the world of that guy, and they just taught me so much. So I did a tour down there, and then got a call from Tom Hinojosa, and he said, "Hey, look, Richard, I'm getting ready to retire. If you want to come back to San Antonio or Texas, now is the time to do it." And we had a conversation about promoting. So he said, "I don't know that I'll be able to promote you right away, but the sooner you get here, the better chance you have." So I said, "Okay." So I did a tour and came back to San Antonio, and he ended up becoming the associate or the deputy SAC in Houston, and was shortly thereafter promoted in San Antonio, and that's where I became a GS. I did my stint here, and then during that time frame, though, before I became a GS, a couple of things that were significant in my life was, number one, the demons that I had been running from for so long, and the ghosts that I had been buried in closets surfaced. And as I was an agent here before promoting, when I on my return from Colombia, I just hit the wall. The naysayers had finally won, and there was nothing more I could do to outrun them. And I found myself in a deep, dark depression. Was drinking a lot. Thoughts of suicide were rampant, and nobody knew it. Right? Nobody knew what was going on because we all do the best undercover work at the office. It's not on the streets; it's in the office. As a law enforcement people, we always hide what we're going through at home, and we want to be at work because it takes us away from it. And I was at home alone. I was in an apartment, on my return from Colombia, and I didn't know how to shake it. Everything that I had heard as a child, everything that I had run from, I could no longer get the high I sought. No matter how many undercover deals I did, where I did them at, um, nothing was providing that high anymore, and I didn't know how to handle it. I had always been a big workout guy, so and CrossFit at the time was up and coming. It was something new. This was in the 2012 era, and so I ended up in a CrossFit gym, and I met an individual by the name of Roland Esparza. uh, was a little bit older than I was, uh, came from the same type of background, uh, put himself through law school, phenomenal attorney here in San Antonio, uh, and him and I became real good friends. And it was really the first time in my life that I became vulnerable, that I opened up and shared some of my deepest, darkest secrets and, confided in him as a friend. And our friendship, we became brothers. Uh, he was a man of faith, and as I, but had always turned around the other way, and just really helped me get out of that funk and clear that closet. And then ultimately met my wife uh, through the relationship I had with Roland. And, um, you know, I did my time here in San Antonio before going to Special Operations Division in Washington, D.C. And then by the time my wife and I had our two children, um, and then was promoted into McAllen as serving as the ASAC.
All these years with all of your success, is there any contact with your family? Do they try to reach out or vice versa?
Man, most of my family's passed. My grandmother passed a couple years ago from dementia. My mom and dad passed. My brother and I, we keep in sporadic contact. Um, I have my uncles have passed. I have two aunts that are still living that are my grandmother's children. We'll talk periodically, but most of my family is with my wife and her family.
Prior to their passing, were there any, I mean, obviously they had to have known that you were now a DEA special agent. How was
Yeah,
that?
so my father ended up in a nursing home because he ended up with liver issues, and I never gone to see him. Our relationship became very strained because he continued to be in and out of prison, and then he used to really manipulate my grandmother for money, and I just hated watching it. It was one of those things where she enabled him. She enabled all her kids like that, her sons. So for me, it was really disappointing to watch that a grown man would take advantage of his own mom like that. And you can't. What do you tell her? She's gonna do what she wants to do. She's a grown lady. But to watch it was disturbing. But once he ended up in the nursing home, I'd see him on Christmas if he showed up, if somebody went to pick him up, and because he couldn't drive anymore. Um, and we'd say hello, but it wasn't really anything where we were celebrating birthdays, and it wasn't a true father-son relationship. My mom had been in and out of the state hospital. She suffered from paranoid schizophrenic. The years of drug abuse had caught up to her. Um, so she ended up in a facilities where it was like a residential facilities where they administer her medication. They gave her a bed to sleep. They cook for her, and during the day she could kind of roam the streets, but at night she had a bed. So it was a state provided system. So I'd stop by and see her every once in a while. Um, but that was the extent of my relationship. My relationship was really with my grandmother, who was godsend. Without her, I would not be any of the man that I am today, and on her prayers, and so she really kind of is the angel per se that kept me straight when I started to go off the beaten path.
Kid,
Oh, good.
you said you like to work and get out there and get after it. Any big cases that stick out or anything at your time in Colombia?
Yeah, so in Colombia, it was not my case, but we ensured that we were there to help out. It was Keith Atwood did a phenomenal case, and it was the first and only ever fully submersible that was seized, and we were featured. Tony and I were featured a couple different times on National Geographic Channel. And it was, I think they picked up something like 20 to 30 people, and the case was prosecuted out of Florida. Um, but a couple of things, you mentioned casework, and when people ask me, "Hey, what's the biggest seizure you ever had?" and what's the most you ever done? And you know, I've done some undercover work in the jungles of Panama, and we did some reversals and some good stuff. But for me, what is more holds more weight than any of that is uh, how I've been able to pay it forward to some of these young agents. Um, Serving as the ASAC in McAllen, um, that position came with as not a lot of GSs. yeah, they'll pay attention to your recommendations, but it has a little more weight when it comes from an ASAC or a SAC, as Brian knows. And I was able to get some people in some key positions that they had dreamt about getting to. One example is a kid that was from Nairobi, and he's like, "Hey, boss, my only dream is I want to go back. I came here as a young kid. I remember standing at the embassy in Nairobi, waiting to get papers to come to the US, and if you could just help me get there, that's all I wanted to do." And I laid out the expectations for him. It wasn't an easy thing. I wanted to ensure that he would, your reputation is all we have in this job, and um, I wasn't going to put mine on the line for someone that it wasn't deserving. So I was very honest. I said, "Here's my expectations. You satisfy these elements, and I'll do everything I can to get you down there." And ultimately, he ended up there. And just to see his reaction and his when he started crying when he came into the office, and I told him the news, for me, that's worth more than any case anybody could ever make, and it's worth more than any dope anyone could put on a table to take a trophy picture with. For me, that's true legacy.
So it's more of that true leadership, right? Like you go backwards, you put a hand backwards to lift up the people behind you, right? Trying to
No,
elevate behind you.
100%. Yeah. Because I wouldn't be where I'm sitting today if it had not been for people taking a chance on me. Let's go back to Ray. Who in their right mind sends a teenage kid to stay with his, 9 and 10-year-old daughter by themselves while he's at work, while his wife's at work, to watch him? Who does that? Who takes that chance, right? I'm not going to do it, and I got a 6-year-old daughter. I'm not leaving a teenage boy with my daughter. Absolutely not. So for him to do that, that was one. Number two, the trooper that gave me a chance in passing my application through the system, Pam Arsamont, Javier Pena, so many other people that gave me the chance. Tom Hinojosa pushed me to go to Colombia. Tony Hubbard said, um, encouraged me to get a score for my SES. Danny Como. These guys were very influential in my life, and if I didn't show them enough respect to be able to help somebody else out and pull the next person up, then shame on me. I never wanted to promote because I had an ego to promote. My whole auspice behind promoting was ensuring that people could go out and do the job and have fun with it without barricades and unnecessary challenges. That was my whole goal.
Your perspective. So as a child, seeing, people around you using drugs, your father selling drugs, and then as a trooper, these big lows on the highway, and then, I know you're prosecuting them federally, but now with DEA, you're working these investigations, and then you go, down south, and then ultimately, special operations, SOD. I mean, your perspective is growing. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, it was amazing to see it at the street level, and then going to Colombia and see it at the lab level, and then, you know, going to Panama and negotiate with, cartel head figures from Reynosa, Mexico, and how the importation process worked. I mean, you're getting a perspective, especially at SOD. You really saw it there at the 30,000 foot perspective, and working with, some of our counterparts from countries and other agencies, and just the dynamics and the magnitude that drugs and how they impact our economy and our society and our neighborhoods was unbelievable. And you can't. I don't even think I have words to be able to articulate, the magnitude and the scope of what it meant for me to be just this young punk kid from a small town that nobody gave a chance, to be sitting there, you know, doing interviews like this today. I would have never thought in a million years this would be where I'm at.
What advice would you give someone, a young person who's struggling, hearing your story? What additional information would you give him or her?
Never quit. It's simple. You never quit. I got, my son is 8. He's an avid soccer player. We're very blessed with his abilities. He puts in the work, and that's what I tell him. It don't matter when you're down 5, you're down 8, you never quit. You play to the whistle stops. And that as bad as I grew up and the fuel that was added to my fire, that's what I got out of it, is I'm never gonna quit. I don't care what you tell me. I don't care what hurdles or obstacles you put in front of me. I'm not gonna quit. I'm gonna find a way to yes, I'm gonna find a way to get the job done. My dedication, my determination, my passion, you know, it 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 it's very beneficial to those that I work for, but those that are competing for the jobs I put in for don't like that, and that's a whole nother segment, that you could talk about in uh, how we sometimes eat our own in the law enforcement community.
Yeah, it's a phrase we used to use a lot, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So, how long with DEA total? And then, can you walk us through from retirement to, what's your transition into
Yes.
non-DEA life?
So I went, I went through some tribulations in McAllen. I had a lot of triumphs, but there was a couple of tribulations that really were major setbacks for me and really were eye awakening. Uh, there were a couple times, or one that they came back to back, where there was a slew of SES openings that were coming around the what's it 2023 time frame, 2022, somewhere around there, when the change of the administration. And I was really encouraged to get a score in which I had no desire to ever want to go that route, never. But the Danny Como and Tony Hubbard said, "Hey, Richard, you know what you're doing down here. We like for you to get a score," and I did. And it wasn't long after that, I think there was like 12 openings for SCSs posted. Well, shortly thereafter, there was a slew of anonymous complaints filed against me that were completely erroneous. However, they had the key words in them, and sexual harassment, conduct unbecoming, stealing money from informants after they were paid, which none of them are true. None of them, they all were cleared, but you still had to go through the process. And for me, I took that very, very hard, because I'd given so much to the agency. I'd given sweat, blood, and tears, unlike, you know, a lot of people. It's always said that there's 1% of the people that do 99% of the work. And that's not just in DA, it's in every facet of work life, um, balance. But I was at 1%, and my wife and my children suffered from it. So it was very hard. And it was especially hard on my wife, because the call came at about 4 o'clock in the morning that I was being investigated. And, my wife at that time was working out in the gym, and I just walk out in our garage, and she could see this look on my face. And I tell her, and she's like, "What do you mean? You're having an affair? Someone's saying you're having an affair?" And of course, you know how, people can think. And so her first question is, "Well, who you having an affair with? Are you having an affair?" And that kind of snowballs in. And as we go through the process, which took about a year, it's like, man, when are they going to finish this? I'm going back and forth to Dallas to do the interviews. And so it was just very emotionally draining on us, right? It made us stronger, but it was still tough. And it was still tough to go back and still put on that good face in the office and lead people, knowing that this is the way some folks felt about you. Man, it was like a betrayal per se. And so I took that really hard. But on the flip side of that coin, it was also good, because you find out real fast who your true friends are. And I did. And Greg Millard, who is now the SAC over in Miami,
Great guy.
uh,
Yeah.
he gets the sack of Europe, and we have a conversation, and and he ends up taking me to Europe. And we do a short stint there. And I came home one day and I said, I had been on the road over 100 days that one year I was there. And my daughter at the time was 4, and it broke her heart every time I left. And I didn't want to be that dad, right? I didn't want to be that dad where I had a great career, but my home life was wrecked. My kids hate me, and, that their memories are, oh, my dad's always on the road, and I didn't want to have that. So we decided to retire, and we came back to San Antonio, and here we are. I've been retired a year now, and uh, deciding what I want to do when I grow up.
You're working in training, or am I wrong? Or
No, so I don't advertise this, but I did go back to work for the state of Texas,
okay,
uh, and I do some stuff for them. But I'm also, I've written 3 books. My latest one is Chasing the High, which is a very in-depth version of what we just talked about. Um, yeah, I do some stuff with Justin King and the command staff in college. I haven't done anything official with him yet, but I'm just having fun. I've contemplated going back to get my master's, and this was a very humbling conversation I had with my wife a couple days ago. Um, so my son is there, and he's like, "Well, Dad, what do you need to go back to college for?" And I said, "Well, son, so I can, be marketable to get hired by someone else, so I could, do better for our family." And he goes, "Well, Dad, I got something you can do." I'm like, what is it?" And he said, "Why don't you just be a dad?" And very, very humbling remark, to like keep things in perspective. So as I go through the transition and continue to move forward, that is what resonates with me, right? Is why not just be a good husband and dad? And that's what I've been working on.
If somebody wanted to grab one of your books, where would we find that at?
So it's available on our website at oneteamg.com. It's oneteamg.com, and the G stands for global, One Team Global. I'm also on LinkedIn at Richard T. Sanchez. So if anybody ever needs anything, I also make myself available to kind of help agents that are and officers that are going through rough patches. People will call all the time, "Hey, this is what's going on," and I lend that ear to them, give them advice if they want it. If not, I just listen. You know.
we'll put those links on the screen. They'll be right here.
Yes, sir.
Well, very interesting conversation. Thank you for sharing. I saw the book on Amazon as well, and I'll
Yes,
check out.
sir. It is on Amazon. That is correct. Yeah. There's 3 that we've written. It's Chasing the High, The Warrior Code. The Warrior Code, which is a leadership book that parallels corporate life and leadership along with law enforcement, and then Rising Through the Ashes, which is kind of the prelude to Chasing the High.
Awesome. You gave me some names I hadn't heard in a while, and I don't want to make every podcast. We don't want to make every podcast episode DEA, but
Right.
we some other folks that we can talk to.
Yes, sir.
Richard, Aaron, you have any?
No, it's all good.
Yeah, thank you for your time and sharing your story and your resiliency, and just keep on pushing ahead. That's something that I think anyone can, young or old, can take from your lesson.
No, I appreciate having me on the show, and in the books, they would not have been possible without Eddie Weiss and 1910 Publishing. They've done a phenomenal job in helping me get this story out there. And again, we all have a story. I'm not trying to make money off my story. I'm just trying to help people and show them that, hey, if I at the executive level at a phenomenal organization can can bear my sins and sorrows and feel comfortable and confident, hopefully that opens the door for people that are going through and suffering what I suffered to know they don't have to do it alone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And you want to close it?
Yeah.
We
We
usually close.
if we have no final thoughts, just want to thank everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.